use. Okay. Perfect.
All right. Shall I start?
Yeah, and I'm just gonna, I know we're very few, but I'm just gonna go ahead and mute everyone so that you can hear clearly when one of us is.
Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We have a small group today, but exciting information to share. Just a brief introduction to Molly and I. We met as dancers in the ballet studio, and our lives took somewhat parallels for a bit of time as we studied acupuncture and then became yoga instructors. Molly now travels the world leading yoga retreats all over really amazing places. She's also a doTERRA wellness advocate, the essential oil company. So if there are questions that come up regarding essential oils, she's really a wealth of knowledge on those and their application for many different aspects of health. She's also an acupuncturist and an herbalist. I currently live in Westland, Oregon. I have a small acupuncture practice out of the detached studio of our home. Through My Healing Homestead, which is the name of my business, I'm also creating malas and teaching mala making workshops, which is for those of you that are not familiar, I think all of you are, but they're a tool that we use in meditation to support mindfulness. Let's see. Tribe is this beautiful shared vision that Molly and I had to bring together the community at a time when we're so separated, and talk about, learn and grow and explore different topics in wellness, and support the mind, body, and spirit, tap into resources that we have at our fingertips, rather than having to go out and search for things that are far away or inaccessible, but really tap into what we have right in front of us. So each month we'll be gathering virtually to discuss different topics. Today, we will be talking about mindfulness and demystifying the practice of mindfulness, and then talking about different ways that we can not only practice mindfulness, but also integrate it into our daily lives.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Could you introduce me every time? I think you introduced me better than I introduced myself. Maybe we should just do it that way. So welcome again. I know we have a few people still trying to sign on here. So welcome everyone. And Jamie, thank you for the beautiful introduction. So mindfulness, what Jamie and I discovered is, so one of our motivations of course is as Jamie so beautifully said, to really empower you with things that might be so obvious, but we don't always recognize in our daily lives for the well-being of our mind, body, and spirit. But also what has come up for us is that there are a lot of sort of terms and cliches circulating in the consumerism, I might say, of wellness, that are these like catchphrases. And how many of you on the call, just by a raise of hand, can say, yes, I've heard about mindfulness? Everyone. How many of you can confidently say, you know what mindfulness is? Right? But it's so funny because even the hand that goes up comes with the shoulders, comes with like, maybe. And so it's one of these beautiful topics that not only we're hoping to clarify a little bit what this could mean to us today, but also to take a little bit of the mystery out of it, hopefully, and to connect you into what it really could mean for us and our well-being. So we would actually love to start the call today. Now, we didn't specify to have you bring a piece of paper or anything, but maybe just to take a moment. And actually, we're a really super intimate group. So I'm also going to do something a little bit different. If anyone would like to share just really quickly what mindfulness means to you. So you can either take a moment here to just reflect and try to put some form to it in your mind, like a given. Sometimes too, these words, they just come up and we just don't pause to think about it, right? We just kind of move on thinking, oh, okay, well, I know kind of what that is. So either taking this moment just quietly to put some form in your mind to what it could mean to you right now, or if anyone has in, just sort of like a short form, something that feels really meaningful to you that you'd like to share. Because we're a more intimate group, we can also open the microphones. Just a little reflection moment. Yeah, Jessica.
For me, I immediately think of being present, doing things with intention.
Mm.
And I think for me, I've used like a Headspace app, and I'm striving to try to be more mindful and just how I carry myself throughout the day, but especially to be more present for my son and for my family.
Yeah, so beautifully said. So now I'm going to put you on the spot because you shared. What
No,
what takes you out of mindfulness throughout the day?
too many things to do.
Okay.
Women are great at multitasking, but I think that it distracts from our mindfulness.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect topic because I've just been trying to revisit this exact thing.
Great. Wonderful. So multitasking definitely high on the list. Thank you so much, Jessica. Appreciate it. Anyone else would like to just share your voice? Yeah, Linda.
I took a virtual class with Pema Chodron on mindfulness. And when you asked the question of Jessica about what it meant, and I can remember Pema Chodron had talked about really being aware of our emotions and our reaction to external stimuli. And she did this beautiful teaching on anger, on Sempa, on catching it when it comes up, of knowing that feeling when that anger starts to rise and catching it and giving it that pause of not taking the bait of our own anger. And it was a beautiful lesson. And I practiced it, for weeks on end, and I was feeling really great about my success of being mindful and being present. And then a semi cut me off on the freeway, and I had to slam on my brakes. And as then he moved over and I passed him, I wasn't even aware of my hand going up as I flipped him off. And it was like my hand was detached from my body at that moment. And I can remember thinking, boy, talk about a lesson in mindfulness, in purposeful thinking, and catching our anger, and how easy that can be in a non-challenged environment, but have somebody cut you off on the freeway, what I would call a challenged environment. It was such a lesson in reality of myself that maybe I'd progressed a minuscule amount in any amount of self-confidence and self-assurance that I had dissolved in an instant. So that was my reaction when you were asking about have we had an example of mindfulness, and that was my classic example that I tried to remember every day about. Remember how that felt? Don't take the bait.
Yeah, so beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that story, that learning, that evolution, right? I mean, this is what life is all about, and this is a huge part of tribe too, is for us to be able to gather and share our experiences, to bring the humanity into some of these topics. But I think both of you have really touched into this idea that mindfulness is really about presence. And presence, when things are going easily and well, is pretty easy. Although I'll say that sometimes too, when things are going easy and well, it's easy for us to slip into autopilot, which also takes us away from presence. But also when we're more challenged, or when we're multitasking and, you know, we start to feel out of our minds, out of our bodies, out of our spirits, this is when this idea of cultivating mindfulness can be a really wonderful thing. And I believe that in our modern world, we're sort of fed a lot of these wellness ideas as consumerism ideas, like mindfulness is something that you need, or that you need to get, or that you should have, or something. But in actuality, mindfulness is a state of being. And when we begin to look through the holistic portal, mindfulness itself is just a way to describe having access in any given moment to the possibly multitudes of practices that help us to stay present no matter what is going on in life. So ultimately, mindfulness is just describing a state of being that we can continually cultivate and catalyze through all of the different possible practices that are there to guide us again and again back to presence. Does that make sense to everyone? And so mindfulness itself isn't even really a practice. It's really all of the other types, meditative practices, physical practices, and we're going to talk about some of those as we progress in our call today and start to identify. But one of the things that Linda said that I really love is also this state of presence brings us closer to being able to identify when we begin to fall out of harmony, rather than when we're already in the depths of despair and trying to figure out how in the world we're going to bring ourselves back. And so mindfulness, a state of being, and hopefully through this discussion, or maybe just even this discussion, will also be a catalyst to begin to help us understand what tools and practices are really at our fingertips to help us to stay more present in each moment of our lives, regardless of what we might find ourselves surrounded by.
Really beautiful. Thanks, Molly. So I want to share just a funny thing that happened this week as I was doing a live video with Molly for the first time. You know, sometimes we have this idea when we do certain practices, like a mindfulness practice or meditation or yoga, that it has to look a certain way. We have to wear certain clothes, or the posture must look or feel a certain way, or in order to sit and do a meditation, it has to be in this quiet, peaceful, calm space. And there's importance to that. And there's importance to cultivating and setting aside that sacred time for those practices. But there's also something to be said about letting go of what we think something should look like and integrating it into our daily lives. As Molly and I were doing this live call this week on mindfulness, I found myself trying to find the perfect spot, the spot with the perfect lighting, with quiet, with nature in the background. And what I found myself running from different points outside of our house, trying to find this spot. I knew it was there. I had found it before, and I was going to come back. And each time I sat down, ready to start the call, something was happening. our ducks were quacking, the house next door is for sale, and lots of people have been coming through and peeking over, and oh, I can't sit there, there's people looking at me, and quiet, non-distracted space. And it became, as I look back, a little bit funny that in this call on mindfulness, where I'm supposed to be present and aware and accepting, I was finding myself being so judgmental and waiting for that perfect moment. I couldn't be mindful because I had to be just so. And that really hit home for me. And it has at other points in my life as well, when I've kind of made excuses for why I can't do yoga right now, or, you know, I don't have the right clothes with me. Yeah. As we sat down and did this call, there were multiple cars that pulled up and people that got out in the short time we were on it. And the mailman came, and I ignored the mailman coming into my yard because I was holding a camera and trying. It was such a good reminder that when we're practicing mindfulness, we're trying to be present and be aware of sensations and feelings in our surroundings, and accepting without judgment, without thinking, ruminating. We're not goal setting. We're not ruminating on the past. We're just present. And thoughts will come and go. The goal is not to try and stop them, but to observe them without judgment. Yeah.
And I think, James, if you don't mind me hopping in, I know we're gonna slide into the there's a really beautiful, and it seems like that those of you on the call with us live right now are possibly well exposed to many different practices, but it really reminds me of one of my favorite Buddhist teachings, right? Which is that we want to interact with things as they are, not as we wished or hoped or expected, or, you know, and this for me is one of the most beautiful explanations of this idea of presence too, because presence is possibly another word that's like, well, what does that mean? Right? And Jamie's giving such a beautiful example of how we tend to hold on to the idea we might have about how things will go in any given moment. But true presence is not losing sight of what we are trying to do, or what we're, you know, wanting to accomplish, or what direction we're moving, but also understanding that we're in constant relationship with life, and how to cultivate our ability to stay in conversation with what really is, rather than to move with the cloak of expectation or attachment, and thereby, you know, diminishing our presence simply by not interacting with what is there.
Yeah. I want to share one more thing that a therapist had said to me at one point, and it was in regards to just kind of wanting to soak something in, and it can be used whether it's a good or positive moment, or also some time of discomfort. And she had encouraged me to stop, pause, and count to 10 in the moment, and really utilize all of my senses to be present, to hear the sounds that were happening, to feel something, whether it was on my skin, or to feel, right? To see what was around me, just a moment to be present and pause for 10 seconds and really let everything into my senses in that moment and capture that moment. And then it passes, right? Whether it's a moment of discomfort or pain, or it's a moment in nature, a moment with your kids that you're wanting to soak in. It was such a helpful practice and helpful tool in mindfulness, and just really not forcing, but being present in a way that you really open all of your senses and soak that in.
And I think the true liaison there then is, because it's so beautiful if you can make it into that moment of pausing, but there's also the space between the real life circumstance and making it into that moment where you can actually allow yourself to feel what there is to feel. And so hence, of course, today's topic is also we're hoping to begin to bridge this gap a little bit in what tools might be available for us in those moments to just bring us from the real life circumstance into the ability to pause for a deep breath. And how can we begin to also orient things in our lives and with our practices to enable us to make it into that moment of just pausing for a moment. That was a lot of moments, just by the way. I did hear myself.
Shall I lead us through a meditation? Yeah? Okay. So we're find a comfortable place to sit. If you feel more comfortable lying down, that's okay. But we're going to take maybe 5 to 10 minutes for a small meditation. It's called Vipassana meditation, so a type of mindfulness meditation. Find a comfortable seated position. If you'd like to close your eyes, you may close your eyes. Feel your tailbone rooting down to the ground, lengthening your spine, lifting up through the top of your head. Begin to bring your awareness to your breath. Calm, deep, and slow. Notice your breath as it moves in and out of your nostrils. Notice the coolness or the warmth of the breath. As you slow and deepen the breath, feel the breath as it moves in, filling the lungs and the belly. And as you exhale, the belly relaxes and the air moves out. And as you breathe here, the mind may wander. And if it does, call it back. Call it back to your breath as it moves in and out. And simply observe. Simply acknowledge. As a thought or feeling or sensation comes up, simply acknowledge and let it go. If your mind begins to wander, call it back as you breathe in and exhale. And as you breathe in and out, bring your awareness to the body, just noticing. Just observing. Just acknowledging any feelings or sensations. And let those feelings or sensations move in and out with the breath. As thoughts come up, acknowledge them and release them. Observe them and let them go. And we call our mind back to our breath. Calm, deep, and slow. When you feel ready, start to wiggle your fingers and your toes. When you feel ready, go ahead and open your eyes. Welcome back. So just as for those of you that weren't with us last week, Molly led us through a deep breathing meditation where we connected again with the breath, breathing deeply in and out. In Vipassana meditation, very similar, we bring our focus to the breath. And the mind wanders, right? It's the nature of the mind. But we use the breath almost as a tool to call it back. Go ahead and turn it over to you, Ma.
Okay, thanks, Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
For how many of you do you feel a little different after that 5 minutes? Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Just the power of pausing and connecting to what's real, and you know, the realist, is that a word? I'm learning Spanish now, so now my Italian, my English, and my Spanish, forget it. Maybe things are going to come out grammatically wrong, so excuse me for that. But you know, the most real thing that we can connect with, of course, is our experience. And so that breathing, that awareness, and as we move from that beautiful introduction to Vipassana meditation, and of course within that meditation is the invitation to begin to feel. And as we're looking to bridge that gap between the moments where perhaps we do fall out of presence and what we could possibly do to draw us back into presence, we want to begin to use our practices and our tools to identify any small signs in our experience that might be telling us that something is happening. Kind of speaking back to Linda's beautiful story, right? To be able to intervene in the moment that something begins to shift, rather than already being in the depths of having lost our way and then trying to find the right tools to crawl ourselves out. And I think that in this particular moment, there's so much circulating about the physical practices, whether they be the yoga practice, or if you're involved with Tai Chi, or even just physical. And I think we're all women on this call, so I'm just going to go ahead and indulge in that as well. Our perception and experience of our body can often be quite skewed. And so for me, and also for these more holistic looks at how we might navigate these moments, the body is so important. The physical body can be so important. And why? Well, when something starts to happen, do you not feel it immediately as a physical sensation? I mean, we get really good at numbing ourselves to it, and we get really good at ignoring it. But one of the very first signals that something maybe is pulling us away from presence is often a sensation in the physical body. Can everyone relate to that in some small way? And so, yeah. And so whatever your relationship with the physical practices might be, I would love to just first offer an invitation that the more you can access even small movements with the body to help you stay in your body, you all of a sudden have access to so many very clear signals about how you are interacting with life. And this is a place that I really love to call in the essential oils. And there are, for those of you who have been, tuning in and all of these various, you're going to start to understand that there are just so many ways to intervene energetically. And that type of discussion is definitely for another call. But if you do recall that smelling an essential oil is being processed in the limbic system, which is directly influencing our heart rate and our respiration immediately. And so when we begin to investigate this idea of mindfulness in presence, just from the physical body standpoint, what we might consider are oils that are going to keep us in our body, that are going to keep us in our own skin. And for today, I will just comment on vetiver. And, when we look at the spectrum of plant medicines, there is also this really beautiful storytelling where the part of the plant that we use medicinally can give us a lot of insight into energetically how it's going to function for us. And vetiver, although it is a grass, it is a really unique grass that has a root system that, rather than most grasses have root systems, right, that kind of spread out, when you're weeding and you pull it up, and there's something so ridiculously satisfying about getting that web of, of roots out of the ground. But vetiver has a root system that actually grows deep down into the soil. And out in nature, vetiver is incredibly important for eliminating the possibility of erosion. And when we metaphorically relate that to our experience in our body, so imagine that we are our own earth, right? Calling in something that will eliminate possible erosion of stability, can be really helpful for continuously calling us back into our bodies. And from the last call, or if you've followed any of the essential oil education, there are many different ways that we can use it. Of course, diffusing, aromatherapy is a wonderful one. So if you begin to identify in your investigations, like, yeah, where one of the first places I go is that I just leave my body, then some of these oils that are helping to kind of reground and call us back into our own skin might be really appropriate oils for you to have handy almost all of the time, depending on, whether that's happening in your home environment, work environment. We can also use the oils during practices. And here's another place that we begin to kind of bridge the gaps of how do I get from A to B. So calling you back to this idea that every experience we have gets energetically distributed in the body, which is why the body is so amazing at giving us signals, right? What could some of those signals be? The tensing up of the shoulders. I don't know if anyone out there is like me, but when I start to get tense, it's actually a funny thing that I press my first two fingers together. And it's interesting because this is the lung meridian. So actually what I'm telling myself is like, breathe, right? But it's one of those funny, anyone else have like funny finger things, the jumping up and down of the legs. So we start to kind of clue ourselves in. Yeah, I see some heads nodding to these little signals that our body energetically starts to give us. But one of the things that we can do is that the physical practice, again, on the spectrum of how it's presented, is something so grandiose and, you must be able to do handstand or whatever. It has to be this. But honest to God, sitting and doing a few deep breaths, just lifting your arms up, right? This is a really valuable physical practice, is to move in harmony. And when you incorporate something like an essential oil into that experience of teaching yourself how to be comfortable in your own skin, then in moments where what life is doing is pulling you away from that comfort, the simple act of reconnecting with the essential oil can be all that you need to draw you back into the place where you can again move from the centeredness of being grounded and rooted in your own body. Does that make sense to everyone? So we want to start kind of just filling in the cement between the building blocks and giving ourselves tools that we incorporate into the practices that are helping to cultivate our presence, so that then when we're pulled out of presence, not in the midst of a physical practice, we also can easily reconnect with remembering what that sensation is of feeling comfortable in our body, so that we can better be in presence in whatever moment might arise.
I love that, Molly, about erosion and the idea of something that helps us to remain grounded while erosion is happening.
Yeah.
Remaining mindful while the house next door is being shown and the mailman is coming and the kids are blah, 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 remaining centered.
Yeah. And I will mention, well, I mean, I guess too, as you can probably begin to understand, for those of you new to this call, Jamie and I could go on for hours and hours. So I do want to be mindful of time and pass the baton, but it actually brings up another really important factor in the discussion, even if we're just talking about the physical practice and what that can cultivate. Because when you're in a moment of distress, you're not going to roll out your mat and do a few sun salutations, probably that's not going to be the right answer, right? So this is why we're trying to make these liaisons. But one of the gifts that, if you have a physical practice of any kind, or if you begin a physical practice of any kind, it begins to clue us into our natural, or our sort of present status quo habitual reaction patterns in life. And for some of us, it might really be that kind of out of body, like stretching out of the physical form. For some of us, it actually might be completely indulging in form so much so that all of our energy becomes stagnant. And in cases like this, we don't want to root down. We actually need to kind of blossom ourselves back up and out, which might be a different category of oils, and so on and so forth. And so it's also a very interesting and beautiful investigation as we're cultivating perhaps the more the more deep practices. What we're really looking for is the like 30-second interventions that lends itself to when we find ourselves out of presence. And so part of the gift of the physical practice, I believe, is also helping us to understand what our habitual reactions to life are, so that, you know, you might not be the vetiver person, you might actually be the peppermint person, because you tend to implode rather than explode. And so it's also just building an awareness of what tools we can have nearby as we understand ourselves better, so that when we are pulled out of presence again, we can draw on the right thing instantaneously.
Could you explain more what that might look like to be more of that person that is ungrounded versus more the person that's stagnant? I know, like for me, when you were talking about the not being grounded in our body, I kind of like felt like I was connected to that, but at the same time, I felt like I'm hyper aware of my body. And I think for me, I might be more the stagnant type who feels every little thing and, you know, is disturbed by every little thing I feel rather than ignoring every little thing I feel. So maybe if you can clarify more the difference between the two and what the experience is like with that.
Yeah, so I'll do that quickly, because I know we still, you know, would love to also present some ideas, but this is such a beautiful, a beautiful question and beautiful clarification. And actually, Christine, I think that somehow you actually in your question kind of blended the two ideas. So of course we're talking, because it's very difficult to tackle every possible situation. So we're definitely looking at overviews, but so the person, when we're talking about like physical sensations, so this might be that we're moving through our day, and it's also the relationship to the physical experience that can be varied as well. So you're moving through your day, your shoulders start to rise, you start to tap your fingers together, but you don't notice these symbols, right? And you continue. So obviously there's tension for whatever reason building up in the body, but you're just not aware of the signals your body is giving you, that you are beginning to sort of ignore whatever might be going on as far as your interaction with life, until someone honks outside while you're trying to do a Zoom meeting, and you're like, someone just honked and I'm on a Zoom meeting and I can't believe it. And, you know, and the volcano comes. So this would be one example. So not necessarily hypersensitive to the signals that your body is giving you, but can still lead to an explosion. Do you see where I'm going here? And so it's difficult kind of to put both in a category. And I would say that in that moment, even though you weren't aware of the signals your body was giving you, that moment of explosion still requires that we come back into the body to be present, to interact with what really was. Does that make sense? And so if that is kind of the tendency, and maybe the opposite, and maybe, you know, on a separate conversation too, we can talk a little bit more about it. But if you're one of those that is like hyper aware of what the body is telling you all the time, then if we're talking about an essential oil intervention, these might be actually that you are already aware of the signals. And then it's up to you, are you going to pay attention to them or not? Does that make sense? Because even if you're hyper aware of what the body is telling you, you could still possibly traverse a period of time without paying attention to them. So it isn't, so they're both calling in the idea of grounding us back into the experience, so that we are interacting with what information is coming in the moment. Does that make sense? And so then it's also like, where does the intervention come? If you're aware that you're really hyper aware of all of these crazy sensations, then maybe the vetiver comes into play much earlier for you, so that you can pause long enough to understand what the sensation is trying to tell you. Does that kind of help?
Yes, I think that's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's important too, Molly, recognizing at what point are we calling in an intervention? At what point are we pausing? When we begin to notice, wow, okay, I'm feeling all of these things. Are we pushing past it, or are we pausing there?
Right.
Or is there not the time and place? Can we not pause? And do we have to work through that a bit longer? And then we've either figured out how to shut some of those things out. Yeah.
And I would say, you know, like if we're talking about also just different essential oils, and I know we do need to move on, but in the first scenario, Christine, where there might be that we begin to recognize that we make it through hours of information coming through the body without ever recognizing it, that maybe we are more of a peppermint or breathe kind of person, where we have the oil at our fingertips to awaken ourselves to the sensations that are being sent to us that we're just completely not noticing, so that we don't need the grounding oil once we explode, because little by little we want to intervene toward the beginning of the story. And so that exhibit A would be more the, you know, like the implosion, sort of the two yin, the dense type of experience, where we might want something to actually awaken our senses again to what we are feeling in the moment, so that we can interact with them sooner.
All right, I'm going to take us on to the next topic. One of my favorites, and this will, I think, Molly, lead on to kind of your next one, malas. For me, malas, so malas are a type of prayer necklace. It's a Sanskrit word that means garland. And they are a tool that's used in meditation to support mindfulness. For me, I was introduced to malas a long time ago in yoga training, but kind of revisited them not too long ago. And they, for me, were a callback, similar to the breath in a meditation, a call back to being mindful, to pausing, to setting aside time for meditation, and having that diligent practice. When I wake up and turn over and see my mala sitting on the table or altar, it calls me back to take a moment before I start my day. Sometimes I'm rushed at that time, and it calls me back later. Maybe I wear it and it calls my mind back. Okay, what was that intention when I created that mala? When I make a mala for an individual, I hold an intention or a mantra or something personal to that individual in mind as I make it. So it's in a way weaved into the mala. It's held with each knot in between each bead, really ingrained in that piece for an individual. And so when I see a mala, whether it's worn on the physical body or sitting next to me, it calls my mind back to that intention, to that present moment. When you use a mala, you're holding each bead at the recitation of a mantra. Sometimes you may use an affirmation or the breath and use it as a tool to count the breath. But it brings in another one of those senses, like the example I shared from my therapist of pulling in all of the senses to the moment. when you use a mala in meditation, you're using the tactile senses, the physical sensation of the bead as you recite in your mind or out loud that mantra. So just another way to really support bringing things together.
Yeah, wonderful, Jamie. And I'm just gonna add to that because I know when we start to also get into a discussion, but when Jamie and I were discussing this topic previously, the idea of the mala was something very significant for you. I think you've said it, but because multitasking was something that came up at the beginning of the call, I just wanted to pull that subject back in. Because that was something that you had communicated to me, that your work with the mala in the meditative process really allows you and facilitates for you to more easily recognize the moments where you're trying to do too many things at the same time. Kind of brings you back into that piece. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just because it was something that that came up at the beginning of the call, this idea of multitasking. And again, because we are all women and it's one of our superpowers to do 80 million things all at the same time, just not always successfully, because sometimes it ends up being more distracting than capable. That tactile sense and that reminder from using that symbol in your meditative practice, and what the meditative practice helps to cultivate as far as our ability to look at one thing at a time, then just the presence of the mala in your life, just like the essential oil, is something that pulls you right back into that wisdom when you need it. I hope I portrayed that well.
So accurately.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
really, at so many moments, my mala, have a couple of them, and they call me back. I mean, I don't know another way to say it, whether it's doing a million things or, the kids are getting loud. And it's for me, that's sometimes a trigger that pulls me out of mindfulness. My attempt to breathe and be present, when things are not sounding great or feeling great, it's hard to sit and be present with that. Molly, you did a meditation for March Mindfulness that you share on Instagram, one where you're sitting in a pile of poop. And sometimes we are, right? Mindfulness is not always a pretty thing. Sunshine and sparkles is sometimes we are in a pile of poop, and that is the moment. And how do we be in that moment, and how do we choose to move through that? Malas for me have been such a helpful tool to call me back.
And it's such a beautiful segue also into sort of the last idea that we'd love to present to you today, because I know also we're kind of reaching our hour limit, but if it's okay with everyone, could we take 5 more minutes? We started a little bit, the Italian 5, I call it lovingly, which is the subject of symbols, of symbolism. And really, in a way, an essential oil becomes a symbol if you incorporate it into your practices, and then it becomes a symbol of the wisdom you discover in those practices in any other moment in your life. And as Jamie is so beautifully describing, the mala, right, incorporated into the practice then becomes a symbol of what wisdom she taps into during that practice. And the last subject is kind of this idea of having an altar. And it can be a sensitive subject depending on your cultural background or your religious upbringing, or, when we get into symbolism, we're also tapping into possible confrontations with what meaning we're giving to things. But really, symbols are just items that help pull us back into an intention. And when we are talking about mindfulness and kind of bridging this gap between, what we're hoping life to be and how we are hoping to participate in life, and then, versus what life really gives us, symbols can be an amazing, really they are ultimately the liaison between the wisdom of the practices and then being able to bring any small piece of that practice into our daily lives. And altars are something that I often do with my groups, with my students, because I think that they can be a really fun way, especially in our living environment, to have things that are visually available that remind us and draw us back into our intentions. And so an altar doesn't necessarily mean that you have Ganesha and, Hindu gods and goddesses, or, the Buddha, or, whatever tradition you might follow. It could be that if you clue into an essential oil that's really useful for your life in this moment, and you have a mala with which you do meditation, and on your last walk through the woods you found a dried piece of wood that just reminds you of what it feels like to breathe fresh air, those 3 items could be your altar. And an altar is usually something that we relate to a sacred space. But when we talk about this idea of mindfulness, another piece of mindfulness is no longer separating our practice and life. It's really having our practices become part of our everyday life in some way. And, we make them smaller, we make them more symbolic. But again, if we begin to bridge this gap more successfully, then we are really allowing ourselves to inviting ourselves into a state of presence throughout the day. So I really love the practice of making an altar. Because I travel, I actually I should have brought it. I'm sorry. It's just in the next room, but I don't want to interrupt the call. But I really have like this little Guatemalan bag, and it has a few stones in it. It has a hummingbird symbol in it, like a few just special things to me that help remind me of who I'm hoping to be as I interact with the world. And they just travel with me, and I put them next to my bed, or when I am at home there, I have just a corner, but it's a place that anytime I'm walking through wherever it is that I'm living, my eyes can catch really easily. And I feel that this, along with the mala, along with the essential oils, is another really beautiful way to just keep us in a joyful way, right? It also doesn't have to be serious. I think it's another misconception of living a mindful life, is that we're stoic and we're peaceful and we're engaging, and all. No, it should be colorful, and it should be wonderful, and it should make us happy to come in contact with these symbols. And you're probably also cluing in with the beautiful meditation that Jamie led us through, and all of these different things. There is definitely one liaison between any of these ideas, and that is the breath. And so any type of symbol that we bring into our day to help us connect our intentions to how we are actually participating in life should usually naturally result in one deep breath. You know what I mean? Like when you see your favorite stone on your altar and you're like, okay, yeah. So this is kind of where we want to go. And in that state of presence, then we begin to draw closer to identifying all of the little messages that life gives us when we're falling out of a state of presence. And so I think that's probably enough about an altar and symbolism. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Just having a little, thing that represents and reminds us. And I suppose the last little piece before I let Jamie do a beautiful closing, as she normally does, is this idea of intention. How many people set intentions? How many of you out there set intentions? Anyone? I mean, kind of, yeah. Or like have wishes or hopes about things. Anyone? Does anyone do affirmations?
Mhm.
Things that are already true? Not so much. Yeah. So some yes, some no. So this is just the last idea that I would love to present to you around this idea of mindfulness and presence. And that is that, okay, intention is a beautiful thing. So I'm definitely not downplaying the practice of intention, because I think that intention is the place that we begin. But an intention is ultimately something you intend to do. It isn't now. It's like maybe, right? Just the nature of the word. And in yoga, especially in the practice of yoga nidra, we have another word called sankalpa, which also means affirmation. And so, what we are hoping, at least with any small bit of the information that we've presented today, is that what this sort of state of being of mindfulness leads us closer toward as well is, rather than intending to do things in life, that we bring ourselves closer and closer to the place where we already are behaving as if they are. An example of this, just to kind of make it maybe more tangible, is Jamie was sharing with me last week a story about grace, right? And wishing to be more graceful. And, oh, I wish I could interact with this parent group in a more graceful way. And this is an intention, like my intention is to be more graceful. Okay, eventually one day. When we're talking about mindfulness, where we really want to draw ourselves into with the help of symbols and practices and everything, is I am grace. And so now what does that look like, right? Now, how am I interacting with life? I'm no longer intending to be this or to do it this way or to have this. I am this, or I already have this, or this is already real for me. And so hopefully you can also see in some small way that any of these tools, whether bringing the mala from your meditative practices or the essential oils from your physical practice or the altar, also just draws us closer and closer to the true states of being, rather than continually wishing for something that isn't already. Does that make sense to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I will leave you for today.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. That brings, just in closing, a saying that I really like, that we create the future that we want by being fully present now. And I think that speaks to sankalpa, and this practice of mindfulness and integrating it into our daily life in different ways in the designated time and space for that practice, but how we bring it into our lives on a practical level. So in closing, thank you for being with us this morning and this afternoon. We will be together again the third Friday of next month, and then we will try and remain on the third Friday of every month, so that's consistent. Saturday.
It might be Friday where you are, but
maybe.
Yeah.
Any I think we don't want to take time from Tribe to delve too much into the individual offerings that Molly and I have, but most of them can be found in our newsletters or on our websites. So there are opportunities for more learning or exploration that way, and you can always reach out if you have questions.
Yeah. I will just add to that I know we were going to say that Jamie has a mala workshop, but it got sold out, so that's super exciting.
There's a second one.
I'm still working on the intention of being able to do something with her online. And if any of you are engaged in social media, I am doing a March mindfulness campaign on Instagram, where I'm just publishing like a small 2 to 10 minute practice each day for people to connect with. So if you feel like that might be something fun for you to engage with or to support or to find new ideas also around this topic of mindfulness, you can join me there.
the first mala workshop sold out. The second one will be on a farm.
Yeah, cool.
Outside on a farm. It's really will be
Do
fun.
you ever intend on doing any virtual mala workshops?
You know what it's in my mind. It
Like
hasn't
maybe
gotten scheduled.
a kit that you can send and then we all do it together or something.
Yeah.
That'd be
I have, that's actually what I did before. Will be my first in-person one. Yeah.
be great. Yeah. Thank you for all that you guys have shared. It was really beautiful.
Thanks for joining
Good.
us,
Thank you.
everyone.
And I know we are like really over time, but if anyone has a question, I'm happy to stay another few minutes if there's any questions, clarifications.
I just wanted to say thank you too. I'm really glad that I could join, and I hope that I can continue to join whenever it's possible. And just a quick question: do either of you have like, I don't know, one pagers or websites that you would point us to in terms of like how to get started with aromatherapy, for example? And then also the other one is how to get started with the malas. So I have one, and it does remind me, because it's you probably can see it, it's hanging, so I see it every morning, but I want to start to incorporate it, and I find myself not knowing, like, it's that thing of like wanting, you were starting with to talk about, Jamie, about wanting it to be in just right, and feeling like there's like I'm gonna do it wrong.
Yeah.
So
let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's set a time. Let's do it. I walked another friend through. I had sent her a mala in a time of a lot happening, and she was so grateful. She didn't know how to use it, and I send instructions, but I know that it took me some time to kind of fumble through. So I would love to sit with you and use the mala for sure.
Yeah, Jessica, and I will just also piggyback on that. So the one pagers you're looking for are the Jamie page and the Molly page. So if you would like to, we can just schedule a time, even in the coming week, and just hop on a call together for a free consultation. And I would be happy to guide you into the world of essential oils and what, ultimately Jamie and I are practitioners, right? Our passion is to help people individually, and this collaborative effort is to hopefully broaden the spectrum and invite people into the beginning of education and connecting. But then ultimately for any of the things that we do, we're so happy to be available on an individual basis to really guide you in the right direction for you. So if you'd like to learn more about aromatherapy, that's totally my realm. And if you'd like to schedule a call with me, then we can just do a personal consultation and I can guide you in that way too.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question, Molly. You held up the bottle of the oil and I tried to see how to spell it, but I wasn't knowing. Okay. Oh, it's got an I. Okay. That's where I was off.
Vetiver. Yeah.
Vetiver.
Sourced in Haiti.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great. So thank you everyone so much again for joining us. We really appreciate your presence here.